The rifle shot cracked across the twilight grasslands like a whip splitting summer air, sending a murder of crows wheeling black against the copper sky. 25-year-old Wakiza pressed himself flat against the ridge's sun-baked stone, his calloused hands finding purchase as he peered through the buffalo grass at the scene unfolding below. Another hunt, he thought grimly, but this time, the prey runs on two legs. Two women in pale bonnets stumbled through the valley, their long skirts catching on sage and prickly pear as they fled from something that put raw terror in their stride. The taller one clutched a leather satchel against her ribs like armor, while her companion gasped and fell hard, her palm opening crimson against the razor grass. 3 horsemen crested the opposite hill, their mounts lathered from pursuit. The lead rider wore a flat-brimmed hat and carried his Winchester with the casual competence of a man who'd used it for more than hunting deer. Behind him, 2 younger killers spread wide in flanking positions that spoke of military training turned to darker purposes. Wakiza's gray Mustang nickered softly behind him, sensing violence the way horses sense storms. The Cheyenne scout was lean as winter pine, with shoulders broadened by years breaking wild horses and tracking game across country that killed the careless. His dark hair hung in twin braids, wrapped with red trade cloth, and his buckskin shirt bore careful beadwork his cousin's wife had stitched during those terrible nights when mercury poisoning from Willow Creek had nearly claimed the boy's life. That memory burned as he watched the mounted killers close distance. The Winchester barked again, dust kicking near the older woman's feet as she dragged her wounded companion behind a wind-carved boulder. Wakiza made his choice. He whistled sharp and low a sound that could pass for a hawk's cry, and his Mustang picked its way down the slope, silent as smoke. He put one shot above the riders' heads, spoiling their horses' composure, while sliding down the cut bank to position himself between hunters and prey. "And this way," he said in careful English. "Can you run?" The older woman stared at him with winter sky eyes, taking in his buckskin and braids in one swift assessment. Her face showed the premature maturity that came from shouldering adult burdens too young. "She's measuring my threat against theirs," Wakiza realized, "and finding me the lesser evil. We have to—" She replied, voice steady despite rifle fire crackling overhead. "They can't get this back." She pressed the satchel tighter against her ribs. The younger woman was fighting consciousness as blood seeped between her fingers, but her eyes held the same steel determination as her sister's. Not just settlers, he thought with growing respect, survivors. Wakiza led them down a cattle trail worn smooth by countless hooves, the path winding through landscape painted gold by the dying sun. Behind them, frustrated voices carried on the evening breeze as the riders tried organizing pursuit. "Stay close," he murmured, noting how the younger sister favored her injured hand. "And trust your feet. This ground has more holes than a politician's promises." The abandoned Prairie Rose way station squatted against the darkening horizon, like a forgotten grave marker, its sod walls having shed most of their clay, chinking over winters of freeze and thaw. But the hay barn maintained solid walls and a door that would latch against unwelcome visitors. Wakiza settled the sisters among sweet timothy hay and dusty harnesses, then checked the barn's single window. The pursuing riders were spreading out with methodical patience, professionals following orders from someone with money enough to hire competence and ruthlessness in equal measure. 3 against how many more back in town, Wakiza wondered. This runs deeper than simple theft. "Who are they?" he asked. The older sister looked at her bleeding companion, then back at Wakiza's steady gaze. Something convinced her to abandon the careful evasions most settlers used with Indians. "I'm Nora Whitcomb. This is Hazel. Those men work for Victor Ransom. He owns the Quicksilver Mill in Owl Canyon." Wakiza knew the name. Everyone between the Platte and Arkansas knew Victor Ransom, a man who'd grown rich extracting silver while the surrounding land grew sick. "What's in the satchel?" Nora's jaw tightened. She's afraid, he realized, but more afraid of failure than capture. Evidence. Receipts showing he's dumping mercury straight into Willow Creek. Purchase orders for dynamite he's using to dam homesteaders' water. letters promising territorial politicians cuts of his silver revenues. Hazel wrapped her bleeding palm in torn petticoat fabric. Papa worked at the mill sometimes, fixing their machinery. He found papers hidden in Ransom's office before... Her voice trailed off. How did your father die? Waukeeza asked, though he suspected the answer. Stampede. Nora said flatly. That's what the inquest ruled. Papa's horse spooked and cattle trampled him. Happened 3 days after he told us about these documents. But Papa's horse never spooked. Hazel added quietly. That old bay was steady as sunrise. Outside hoofbeats circled the station. Waukeeza pressed his eye to a chinking gap and watched 3 hard-faced men dismount. Their leader was thick-bodied with greasy hair and the swagger of someone used to getting his way through violence. Greasy Pete Hutchins, Nora whispered. Ransom's foreman. Papa said he's killed more men than fever and accidents combined. They pressed into the hay as boots tramped across warped floorboards, accompanied by systematic destruction. Waukeeza had hidden from cavalry during the Indian Wars, but those soldiers followed rules. These men served different authority, one measured in silver rather than justice. Why help us? Nora whispered as searchers cursed through thin walls. Waukeeza was quiet, listening to men kick holes in siding. When he spoke, his words carried weight of personal loss. Last winter, my young cousin drank from Willow Creek during the drought. The water looked clear and cold like mountain streams should taste. But within hours, he was vomiting blood, burning with fever that wouldn't break. He paused, remembering those terrible nights when the boy's small body convulsed with poison. 8 years old, he thought bitterly and almost lost to white man's greed. For 3 weeks, he couldn't keep food down. Lost so much weight, his ribs showed through skin. My uncle's wife blamed evil spirits, but I knew better. I'd seen that silver shine on rocks downstream from the mill, smelled the metal taste when wind carried wrong scents from the canyon. He turned to both sisters. Your father's papers might stop other children from drinking that poison. That's reason enough. The searchers gave up near midnight with muttered curses about tracking in darkness. Waukeeza waited another hour before relaxing, knowing Greasy Pete was cunning enough to leave watchers. When satisfied they were alone, the 3 shared hardtack and jerked beef from his saddlebags, along with water that tasted sweeter than wine after hours of fearful silence. Waukeeza used clean cloth to properly bind Hazel's palm. Noting the cut was deep but straight, none attempted sleep. Instead, they sat in fragrant hay while night deepened, sharing intimate conversation that emerges when people face mortal danger together. Nora was 22 years older than Hazel, with practical intelligence sharpened by managing a household since their mother's death from consumption. She could read and cipher better than most officials knew water rights law well enough to quote statutes. But beneath composed exterior, Waukeeza sensed something brittle like a bowstring drawn too tight, too long. She's been carrying this family since she was 16, he realized. No wonder she looks like she might snap. Hazel was 18, gentler in disposition despite current circumstances. She'd taught reading to Prairie Rose's children before the council decided educating Indian youth alongside whites violated community standards. I miss teaching, she said wistfully. There's something magical about watching a child's face when they first understand how letters become words. You'll teach again, Nora said firmly, though her voice carried undertones of doubt. When this is over. If we live that long, Waukeeza thought. As dawn's first light crept across the grasslands, Waukeeza made his decision. I know a place. My uncle keeps horses at a camp near the foothills. We can reach it by noon if we move careful. Nora studied his weathered face. He could have left us to die, she thought, but he stayed. That means something. Why should we trust you? Because right now, you don't have other choices that end with both of you breathing tomorrow. The horse camp occupied a natural amphitheater where Willow Creek curved around mature cottonwoods, their leaves touched with autumn gold. Split rail corrals held a dozen horses, while several teepees stood near water where grass grew thick. Two young Cheyenne women in faded calico washed clothes at a wooden trough as Wakiza led the sisters down from the ridge. They looked up without surprise. Visitors weren't uncommon, though white women were unusual enough to draw curious glances. From the largest teepee emerged a man who made Wakiza's shoulders relax with visible relief. Chogun was his mother's brother, a warrior of 50 winters, who'd earned council status during cavalry conflicts. Gray hair hung in traditional braids, wrapped with otter fur, multiple bone chokers displaying hard-won status. Nephew Chogun said in Cheyenne, switching to English for the sisters. "You bring interesting companions early." "Uncle, these are the Whitcomb sisters, Nora and Hazel. They carry evidence of crimes against our people and theirs. Dangerous men hunt them for this knowledge." Chogun's dark eyes moved from sisters to Satchel to Wakiza's face. Wordless communication passed between the men, understanding built on years of kinship and shared struggle. "Come, sit, eat. Tell me these troubles." One of the young women brought venison stew with wild onions and prairie turnips, plus flat bread cooked on hot stones. As they shared the meal, Nora explained about her father's mill work, his discovery of systematic mercury contamination, and forged documents transferring water rights to Ransom's corporations. "Papa always said Ransom was poison in human form," Hazel added. "Not just his operations, but the man himself. How he looked at people like Ori to be crushed and processed." Chogun listened without interruption, occasionally asking quiet questions, showing he understood both immediate danger and broader implications. When Nora finished, he gazed toward snow-capped peaks for several minutes. "This mill's poisoned water reaches our grazing grounds. Last summer's drought, we lost 3 young horses to sickness from contaminated streams. Medicine Man said their spirits departed for sky country too young." A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermals from sun-warmed earth. Wakiza watched its flight and felt familiar tightness between shoulder blades, danger approaching. "We need to move. Open ground makes us easy targets." As if summoned dust clouds appeared on the eastern horizon. 2 riders at steady lope, covering ground efficiently. Chogun shaded his eyes, studying the approach. Ransom's hunters? Wakiza was already moving, helping sisters toward the horse corral. Has to be. They'll have trackers, maybe reservation police who sold honor for government wages. The older Cheyenne began striking camp with practiced efficiency, while young women led saddled horses toward cottonwood cover. Wakiza selected a sturdy pinto mare, helping Nora mount behind him as he spurred toward trees. "Where can we go?" she asked, arms circling his waist. "Anywhere but here," he replied, though privately understanding their options were narrowing. Ransom had money, influence, and men willing to kill for both. "But we have something he doesn't expect." Wakiza thought, the kind of desperation that makes ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. Behind them, dust clouds grew distinct, 2 hard-faced riders leaning low like hounds on scent. The chase was entering a new phase that would test everyone's limits. Cottonwoods closed around them like green tunnel-dappled sunlight, dancing across horses' necks as they pushed deeper into country, where pursuit would be difficult but not impossible. Somewhere behind, shouts echoed as hunters reached the abandoned camp. One step at a time, Wakiza told himself. Stay alive long enough to get the evidence to honest men. 6 riders with a canvas-covered wagon materialized from heat shimmer like deadly mirage, their systematic deployment suggesting predetermined destination. From concealment among cottonwoods, Wakiza counted men and noted professional spacing, too many for running fight, especially protecting the sisters. The lead rider bore Greasy Pete's unmistakable bulk and swagger tobacco-stained beard visible at distance. Behind him rode lean predators, with restless energy of killers seeking fresh meat. Professional manhunters, Wakiza realized with sinking heart. Ransom's not taking chances anymore. "What's in the wagon?" Nora whispered. "Nothing good." Wakiza noted how carefully canvas was secured wagon springs, compressed under unusual weight. Probably supplies for extended search, maybe explosives. As riders dismounted to examine abandoned camp, remains 2 men untied canvas, revealing wooden crates stenciled with red warnings, danger explosives. Enough powder to level half of Prairie Rose, Wakiza thought grimly. Whatever Ransom's planning, he means to finish it permanently. Search every inch. Greasy Pete bellowed with unquestioned authority. They can't have gone far, and I want that evidence before sundown. Searchers spread systematically, checking stalls and overturning feed bins, while their leader consulted pocket watch and scanned ridges through field glasses. These weren't frustrated amateurs. They followed organized plan designed to flush quarry from hiding. Chogan appeared beside Wakiza like smoke given form. 6 men, well-armed, disciplined. Enough blasting powder to level a town. They mean permanent finish. Where are the women? Safe with horses 2 miles upstream where creek forks around Beaver Island. But we can't stay. Wind carries scent, and they have trackers who read sign like words on paper. They were trapped between necessity and impossibility, needing movement, but lacking cover for required distance. Grassland between position and next concealment stretched nearly a mile, most visible from elevated ground, where Greasy Pete positioned lookouts. 6 professional killers against 3 people, and whatever ammunition we can carry, Wakiza calculated grimly. Not odds any sane man would take. Decision was made when a searcher found fresh horse droppings near the trough, evidence too recent for normal camp activities. The man called his discovery, and within moments, the entire group converged with weapons drawn. Run for the creek, Wakiza said, helping Nora down. Stay low, use every scrap of cover, don't stop until you reach willows downstream. They moved like shadows, fleeing dawn, using every depression and bush, while rifle fire began cracking behind them. First shots were wild shooters firing at movement rather than clear targets. Keep moving, he told himself, half carrying Hazel when she stumbled. Speed matters more than stealth now. Hazel stumbled, reaching creek bank, injured hand, making balance difficult. Wakiza caught her arm, half carrying her through knee-deep water, while Nora splashed alongside, still clutching the precious satchel. I can manage. Hazel gasped, though her face was pale with pain. She's tougher than she looks, Wakiza thought with growing respect. Both of them are. Behind them, horses thundered down slope as pursuit abandoned stealth for speed. Bullets clipped willow branches overhead, sending leaves spinning like green snow, while fugitives pushed deeper into bordering marsh. There. Nora pointed toward a maintenance shed beside railroad tracks serving the mill's ore shipments. Crude but solid, built from mill ends and roofed with overlapping tin sheets that would stop most rifle fire. They reached the building as mounted men emerged from willows, horses plunging in soft ground, while riders cursed and fought for control. Wakiza helped both sisters through the back door, leading borrowed horses around where they'd be hidden. Sound of approaching handcar reached them, rhythmic chunk of coordinated pumping. Through siding gaps, he saw 2 railroad workers in striped coveralls approaching from Prairie Rose, faces set with grim determination of men earning danger pay. Following at distance came a section crew's speeder's small engine puttering, while armed men crowded the platform like wolves gathering around wounded prey. We can't stay, Wakiza said, checking rifle loads. They'll surround us within minutes. Hazel was rebinding her cheek cut, where willow branches had caught her during flight. Blood seeped through improvised bandage, but her voice stayed steady. She's not the same girl who fell in the grass 12 hours ago, Wakiza observed. Fear has burned away her softness. The handcar's moving slowly, she observed. If we could time it right, jump aboard while they're focused on pumping. Nora grasped her sister's meaning immediately. Ride it toward town until we can get off safely. It's insane, Wakiza thought, which might be exactly why it could work. It was desperate, dangerous, possibly suicidal, exactly the kind of plan that might succeed because no rational person would attempt it. When I open that door, run straight for tracks. Don't look back, don't hesitate, don't stop until you're on that platform." The door swung open, revealing chaos. Mounted searchers had tangled in willow maze horses, plunging while riders struggled for clear shots through dense vegetation. Handcar crew focused on water rather than rails pumping steadily toward what they believed was Quarry's position. They ran with desperate speed of people understanding. Hesitation meant death, covering open ground in sprint that seemed eternal while lasting only seconds. Waukeeza reached Handcar first, vaulting onto wooden platform and clubbing one startled worker with rifle butt while kicking the other onto gravel roadbed. Simple violence, he thought grimly. Sometimes it's the only language that works. Nora landed beside him with feline grace, grabbing abandoned pump handle. Hazel made desperate leap that nearly sent her under steel wheels, but willing hands pulled her to safety as the car continued toward Prairie Rose. Behind them, speeders' whistles shrieked as crew realized what happened. The engine began accelerating, black smoke pouring as throttle opened to maximum. Armed men on platform opened fire, immediately, bullets spanging off iron framework and chewing splinters from wooden deck. "Can you work this thing?" Nora asked, throwing weight against pump handle. Same principle as drawing water from deep well. Waukeeza replied, matching her rhythm. "Keep pumping and pray track stays solid." And pray we don't hit a cow or a washout or any of the dozen other things that could end this ride permanently, he added silently. The handcar gathered speed as they coordinated efforts, slight downgrade toward Prairie Rose, adding momentum. Wind-whipped hair as countryside blurred past transforming landmarks into streaks of color. Behind them, pursuing speeder gained ground, mechanical advantage, becoming apparent as distance steadily decreased. Rifle fire intensified, bullets striking closer with each volley as enemy marksmen found range. "Sighting ahead," Hazel called, pointing toward maintenance track branching off main line. Her words were cut short by bullet-shattering water barrel lashed behind pump mechanism, sending precious liquid across tracks in silver arc catching sunlight. One shot punched through platform between Waukeeza's feet, close enough he felt wind of passage. Too close, he thought, and getting closer by the second. Then he saw the obstacle that would end their gambit misaligned rail section, where sloppy maintenance left gap in track bed. At current speed, hitting discontinuity would derail them instantly, probably killing all three. "Jump!" he shouted, grabbing both sisters and pulling them toward the platform edge. They leaped just as handcar struck damaged rails, impact sending iron and wood, separating in shower of sparks and splintered timber, sounding like world's end. Pursuing speeder was forced to brake hard, avoiding wreckage crew, scrambling to deploy emergency procedures while cursing maintenance failures. The three fugitives rolled down gravel embankment into sunflowers, growing tall beside irrigation ditch yellow blooms, providing concealment while they caught breath and assessed injuries. Hazel emerged bleeding from numerous small cuts, dress torn and muddy, but spirit unbroken. She's found her strength, Waukeeza realized, watching the young woman check her sister's condition before tending her own wounds. Fear has shown her what she's really made of. Nora had lost bonnet and hairpins during the leap, dark hair streaming loose in a way that made her appear younger than usual. But leather satchel remained secure, precious contents intact, despite violent escape. Prairie Rose is less than 2 miles. Waukeeza said, helping them up while watching back trail. "We can make it on foot if we stay off main road, use irrigation ditches for cover." They struck out across increasingly familiar country, following cattle paths and fence lines offering concealment. Behind them, smoke rose from wrecked handcar, while angry voices organized ground search. Every minute we stay ahead is a victory, Waukeeza thought. But victories don't win wars, only survival matters now. The sun climbed toward noon zenith, promising clear weather, favoring pursuers with field glasses and tracking patience. But darkness would eventually fall, and darkness had always been ally of those knowing how to use it properly. One step at a time, he reminded himself. Keep the evidence safe, keep the sisters alive, let tomorrow worry about itself. Wanted posters decorated every hitching post and storefront like grotesque wallpaper crude woodcuts, bearing vague resemblance to human features staring from beneath bold lettering. Cheyenne instigators and accomplices, 100 reward. Below main images, smaller text specifically named Nora and Hazel Whitcomb wanted for theft, sedition, and conspiracy. The sisters' faces were rendered with sufficient accuracy to make recognition likely. $100, Wakiza thought grimly. More than most people see in 6 months. That'll buy cooperation from folks who might otherwise stay neutral. Wakiza pulled hat brim low, keeping to shadows between buildings as they made their way toward the livery stable. The sisters had improvised veils from petticoat fabric, but settler clothing still marked them clearly as targets. Great Scott, Nora whispered, staring at her likeness on feed store walls. How did they print these so quickly? Ransom's been planning this for months, Wakiza replied. He just needed the right excuse to spring his trap. And we walked right into it, he thought bitterly. 3 people against a man who owns half the territory's officials. The livery stable occupied a corner lot, where Main Street met railroad siding, wide doors opening onto maze of stalls and tack rooms carrying familiar scents of hay leather and honest horse sweat. Comfortable smells speaking of legitimate business rather than corruption and violence. Dr. Edwin Barnes looked up from examining a lame mare's forefoot as they slipped inside weathered face, immediately creasing with concern. The physician was perhaps 40, with steady hands and patient manner marking someone who'd spent decades setting bones and delivering babies across scattered ranches. Tarnation, he murmured, recognizing sisters despite disguises. Half the territory's got bounty hunters looking for you two. His experienced eyes took in Hazel's bandaged cheek and dried blood on torn dress, professional instincts overriding political considerations. Sit down, child. Let me tend that wound before infection sets in. As Dr. Barnes cleaned and restitched the cut with practiced efficiency, he spoke in low, urgent tones about political situation engulfing Prairie Rose. Town Council was meeting in continuous emergency session, preparing to vote on seizing Whitcomb Ditch under territorial emergency law, transferring water rights to whoever demonstrated more efficient public utilization. Public good, Wakiza thought with dark humor. That's what they're calling Ransom's private profit now. Ransom's influence had spread through community like poison in well-reaching previously neutral men. Several council members had received loans during previous winter's difficulties, debts now called due in form of favorable votes. But there's still hope, the doctor said, tying off final suture precisely. Judge Laurent's circuit includes Prairie Rose. He's scheduled to return from Fort Collins in 8 days. If you can stay alive until then, he'll hear your case properly. He pressed small brown bottle into Wakiza's palm, carbolic acid, according to faded label. If you're determined to enter Owl Canyon and confront Ransom directly, you'll need protection against mercury vapors concentrating in stamp room. That poisoned air will strip lung lining if breathed without precautions. Wakiza pocketed the bottle, understanding both practical necessity and symbolic significance. Dr. Barnes had treated enough mercury poisoning to know exactly where contamination originated. 8 days, he thought grimly. Might as well be 8 years. We need to find Beatrice Lane, Nora said, adjusting makeshift veil. She has documents that belong to Papa legal papers providing additional evidence. Dr. Barnes shook his head grimly. Schoolhouse has been padlocked by council order. They voted last week to close it permanently, claiming educating Indian children alongside whites violated community standards. What about Miss Beatrice? Fighting them every step. But one woman against combined weight of money politics and popular prejudice. His shrug conveyed more than words about difficulties facing anyone opposing powerful interests. They left through rear exit, making their way toward Schoolhouse, through alleys reeking of kitchen scraps, but offering concealment from main thoroughfares. The building stood at Prairie Rose's eastern edge, where Whitcomb Ditch ran closest to settlement. White-painted walls now bore crude graffiti. "Go back east, and no Indian lovers." Someone had nailed hand-lettered sign to front door. "Closed by territorial education, authority violators prosecuted." So much for the land of the free, Waukeesa thought bitterly. But front entrance was secured with heavy chain and padlock substantial enough to restrain a bull, while back door stood slightly ajar despite official closure. Lamplight flickered behind drawn curtains. "Miss Lane," Nora called softly. Door opened immediately, revealing a woman of perhaps 35, dark hair, severely pinned practical calico, protected by teacher's canvas apron. Beatrice Lane possessed quiet authority that could silence unruly children with single glance. But her eyes now held weariness of someone fighting losing battle against systematic injustice. "Nora Whitcomb. I've been expecting you, though. I hoped you might arrive under better circumstances." "She's been waiting." Waukeesa realized, noting carefully prepared refuge and supplies stacked near windows. "This woman has more steel than most men I've known." Schoolhouse interior remained monument to frontier education, despite official closure, hand-hewn benches, in neat rows pot-bellied stove, in corner slate blackboard, covered with half-erased arithmetic problems, speaking of interrupted lessons. "I have something belonging to you," Beatrice said, moving toward old pump organ, dominating one corner. She pressed hidden catch and panel in instrument's base, swung open, revealing small storage compartment lined with oiled cloth. From hiding place, she withdrew leather portfolio sealed with red wax, bound with ribbon, faded from blue to pale gray, over months since creation. "Your father entrusted this 3 months before his death. Made me promise to keep it safe until you came of age, saying it contained insurance against men who mistake greed for wisdom." Peter Whitcomb was smarter than anyone gave him credit for, Waukeesa thought. Nora broke wax seal with trembling fingers, face pale as she unfolded papers bearing her father's handwriting. As she read, expression shifted from hope to amazement to pure anger, illuminating features from within. Its comprehensive land patent witnessed by Judge Laurent himself during his last circuit. "Papa deeded schoolhouse property directly to us, along with permanent water rights to entire section of Whitcomb Ditch running through Prairie Rose." Beatrice smiled for first time since their arrival, expression transforming careworn features toward beauty. "Your father understood which way political winds were blowing. He prepared insurance because he knew someday his family might need legal protection." Legal protection, Waukeesa thought grimly, assuming there are still honest judges to enforce honest law. But triumph was destined to be brief. Heavy boots tramped across front porch, accompanied by clink of spurs and weapons announcing armed men with official business. Greasy Pete's voice boomed through thin walls like thunder. "Open up. We have warrants for fugitive arrest signed by proper territorial authority." Waukeesa moved to nearest window, parting curtains to peer through gap, revealing their problem scope. At least dozen men surrounded building, some carrying torches, throwing dancing shadows, while others positioned themselves controlling escape routes. Several wore local constable badges, lending official authority to what might otherwise be dismissed as vigilante action. This wasn't random, violent, systematic enforcement designed to crush opposition through corrupted legal channels. "They're not taking chances this time," he observed. "This is meant to be the end." "The organ," Beatrice whispered urgently. "Help me move it." Together, they wrestled heavy instrument aside, revealing root cellar entrance concealed beneath wooden base. Space below was cramped and musty, but connected to old storm drainage system running beneath town's main street, forgotten infrastructure that might provide salvation. "Go," Beatrice commanded, pressing brass key into Waukeesa's palm. "This opens maintenance gate at drainage system's north end. I'll stay and give them someone to arrest, buy you time to reach safety." Nora grasped teacher's weathered hand. "Come with us. They'll hurt you for helping." Beatrice Lane straightened shoulders and smoothed apron with hands showing only slightest tremor expression, reflecting calm determination of someone who'd found life's purpose and intended fulfilling it regardless of cost. Someone needs to keep this school ready for when children return to learn together without regard for skin color or parent language. That someone is me. Another hero, Wakiza thought, with mixture of admiration and sorrow. This territory breeds them and buries them just as fast. They descended into root cellar as axes began biting front door above sound of splintering wood, mixing with shouted orders and crash of overturned furniture. Behind them, Beatrice's voice offered calm responses to increasingly aggressive questions, buying precious seconds for escape. Storm drain was barely wide enough for Wakiza's shoulders, requiring crawling through accumulated debris and standing water-soaking clothing and chilling bodies. But it ran straight toward Willow Creek, without branching, providing direct route away from pursuers if they could endure a claustrophobic journey. Like being born again, Wakiza thought grimly, if birth involved this much mud and fear. Tunnel emptied into stone culvert where ditch passed beneath Main Street water running swift and cold in pre-dawn darkness. They emerged like underworld creatures soaked and shivering, finding themselves in freight yard behind Morrison's general store. Shadow detached from loading dock, and Wakiza's hand moved instinctively toward knife before recognizing Deputy Will Harper's slight figure. The lawman stepped into moonlight, with hands clearly visible, showing he meant no immediate threat, despite official position. But which Will Harper is this, Wakiza wondered? The one who owes ransom, or the one who took oath to serve justice? Turn back now, Will said quietly, voice carrying genuine concern rather than authority. Ransom will hang all three if he gets chance, and he's got political connections to make it look legal. Wakiza studied Deputy's face in pale light, reading internal conflict marking decent man caught between duty and conscience. You've seen those crates his men carry. You know what he plans doing with them. Deputy's hand moved unconsciously toward gun and then stopped as memory and guilt warred across features. Behind his eyes, Wakiza saw struggle of someone who'd made compromises with corruption and was beginning to understand true cost. He's fighting himself as much as us, Wakiza realized. Question is, which side wins? 3 years ago, my sister Sarah took sick with scarlet fever. Will said finally, words coming slow and painful. Doc Barnes did everything possible, but medicine she needed cost more than I could earn in half a year. Ransom fronted money without being asked, said he was glad helping law-abiding family in need. And now he's collecting, Nora said softly. Deputy nodded miserably, badge catching moonlight like tarnished mirror. But what he's asking now? And Sarah's been looking peaked again lately, drinking same water as everyone downstream from his mill. Funny how these things work out. The mill's poison is taking his sister anyway, Wakiza realized. All his compromises for nothing. He reached into coat, withdrawing brass key and pressing it into Wakiza's palm with gesture of someone casting off burden carried too long. South gate of Quicksilver Mill. It'll be unlocked until dawn. Will Harper melted back into shadows, like ghost seeking absolution, leaving them alone, with weight of decision pressing down like storm clouds. Mill lay 15 miles up Owl Canyon, fortress of stone and iron, built into mountainside where silver ore emerged in profitable quantities, corrupting everything they touched. Going there is probably suicide, Wakiza thought. But staying here is certainly death. Going there represented probable suicide given Ransom's resources. But remaining in Prairie Rose meant certain capture, and capture would lead to death, just as surely as bullets, only more slowly, with greater suffering. I know where he keeps the master ledger, Nora said, reading Wakiza's thoughts. Papa showed me once when he took me to settle repair bill. There's safe behind Ransom's desk, containing all records proving his systematic corruption. Hazel touched her sister's arm, gently young face, marked by exhaustion, but also by something new hardness that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. Nora, you can't seriously consider this. The risk is enormous, but so is the reward, Wakiza thought. Stop Ransom or watch him poison the entire territory. Greater than letting him blow up our ditch and steal land from every homesteader between here and Fort Collins. Nora's voice carried steel determination that had sustained her family through years of struggle. Greater than allowing him to poison every creek and territory for profit, Wakiza looked from one sister to other, seeing in their faces same stubborn courage that had carried his people through impossible battles. These weren't helpless settler women of popular mythology, they were individuals who'd carved civilization from wilderness through sheer force of will. "Then we go to the mill," he said, adjusting rifle sling and checking ammunition. "But we go smart, we go quiet, and we accept that one mistake up there will likely be our last. And may the spirits guide us," he added silently, "because we're going to need all the help we can get." Moon was rising over eastern plains, casting silver light across grassland stretching toward distant mountains like frozen ocean under star-filled sky. Behind them, Prairie Rose's lights dwindled to scattered pinpricks, while ahead, dark mass of Owl Canyon waited like open mouth, ready to swallow anyone foolish enough to enter. They were walking into enemy territory's heart, armed with nothing more substantial than courage and desperate hope that sometimes truth proved stronger than money. But as Wakiza learned during Indian wars, hope could be salvation or destruction, depending on how carefully handled and whether backed by competent planning and steady nerves. Night wind carried scents of sage and pine down from mountains, along with something else, metallic tang of industrial processes, having no place in natural world. Somewhere ahead, in darkness, waited Victor Ransom's empire of silver and corruption. And with it, evidence that might save not only their lives, but future of everyone, depending on clean water and honest governance. One more gamble, Wakiza thought as they climbed toward canyon mouth. Winner takes all, loser takes nothing, including breath. The quicksilver mill crouched against canyon wall like mechanical spiders spinning webs of silver and poison smokestacks, jutting toward star-filled sky, while stamp batteries stood silent in pre-dawn darkness. The complex covered several acres of mountainside, connected by wooden catwalks and narrow-gauge railways, carrying ore from mine shafts to crushing machinery. But this time, Wakiza noted differences from their previous reconnaissance. Guard posts flanked main entrance lanterns, burning beside makeshift shelters where armed men maintained watch. Patrol routes crisscrossed perimeter, marked by moving torches and crunch of boots on gravel. "Ransom's tightened security since our last visit," he observed. "He knows we're coming. On more guards than before." Nora whispered, noting increased activity around administrative buildings. "Papa used to say Ransom was paranoid, but this looks like preparation for war." They worked their way through tailings piles and equipment yards, following Deputy Harper's directions, while keeping to shadows, offering concealment from roving sentries. Air grew thick with mercury vapors as they climbed higher, and Wakiza was grateful for carbolic-dampened cloth masks. "Every breath in this place is borrowed time," he thought grimly. The loading dock on facility's east side was indeed less protected, with only single guard making rounds every 20 minutes by Wakiza's count. They waited through 2 complete cycles, timing the man's movements, until they could predict his pattern with reasonable confidence. "When he turns the corner, we move," Wakiza breathed. "Straight to that side door, no hesitation. And pray he doesn't decide to change his routine tonight," he added silently. The guard disappeared around building's corner, beginning his circuit with board efficiency. They sprinted across open ground, reaching door just as distant bootsteps faded into industrial noise that never completely stopped. Wakiza tested the handle locked, but not beyond his skills with knife blade and patience. Every lock has a weakness, he thought, just like every man. Mechanism clicked open just as approaching footsteps announced guard's return. They slipped inside, closing doors softly as lamplight swept past windows. Inside, they found themselves in storage room lined with spare machinery parts and industrial supplies. But more importantly, they could hear voices through interior wall. Multiple men discussing something urgent, in tones suggesting important business. The night shift, Wakiza realized. But talking about what? "Train leaves at 6 sharp," someone was saying with supervisor's authority. Everything needs to be crated and loaded by 5:30, or we miss connection in Denver. What about the safe? Another voice asked. Boss wants it emptied completely. Every document, every record book, everything that could connect him to territorial officials. Clean slate before investigation starts. Investigation. Waukeeza felt his heart sink as implications became clear. They'd arrived just as Ransom was preparing to destroy all evidence of his corruption, probably tipped off by their previous break-in attempt. But Nora was listening intently, face showing sudden understanding. "That's not Ransom's voice," she whispered. "It's his bookkeeper, Morrison. And if they're loading everything onto morning train?" She didn't finish the thought, but Waukeeza grasped her meaning. Whatever evidence remained would be consolidated in one location, for transport, making it vulnerable to theft if they could reach it before departure. "All our eggs in one basket," he thought grimly, but at least we know where the basket is. They moved deeper into building, following corridors leading toward administrative offices, with careful stealth of people understanding discovery meant death. But this time, their route was complicated by workers preparing crates and loading documents requiring precise timing to avoid detection. At main office level, they discovered situation was both better and worse than expected. Safe stood open, contents being systematically packed into wooden boxes by 3 men working under Morrison's supervision. But office itself was brightly lit and constantly occupied. Too many people, too much light, Waukeeza calculated. "We need a distraction. We need something to draw them away," Hazel whispered, studying scene through door crack, with focused attention of someone who'd learned to think tactically under pressure. "She's changed," Waukeeza noted. "This ordeal has shown her what she's capable of." Waukeeza was about to suggest creating noise elsewhere when fate provided its own solution. A steam line ruptured somewhere in stamp room below, sending clouds of vapor and shriek of escaping pressure echoing through facility like mechanical banshee. "What in blazes?" Morrison exclaimed, abandoning his packing to investigate emergency that could shut down ore processing for days. All 3 workers followed him out, leaving office temporarily unguarded, but not unoccupied. They could hear footsteps overhead, suggesting guards remained on upper floors. Now or never, Waukeeza thought, pushing through door. They rushed to safe, grabbing armfuls of documents and stuffing them into empty crates while listening for returning footsteps. Most papers seemed routine financial records or assay reports, equipment purchase orders. But then Nora found what they'd really come for. Hidden in safe's deepest recess was Steele's strongbox secured with combination lock, small enough to carry, but heavy enough to require both hands. "This has to be it," she thought, lifting box with effort. Papa mentioned seeing Ransom put something in special box, said it was insurance against insurance. Waukeeza lifted strongbox, feeling substantial weight, speaking of metal objects rather than documents alone. Too heavy for papers. There's something else inside, something he values more than gold. Or something that could destroy him if it fell into wrong hands, Nora thought with growing excitement. Our hands. They were debating how to open combination lock when voices returned to corridor Morrison and workers coming back from investigating steam leak. Or window. Waukeeza said without hesitation, grabbing strongbox and heading for office's rear wall. "It's our only way out." They crashed through glass in shower of sharp fragments that cut exposed skin and tore clothing, landing hard on stamp room's metal roof 20 feet below. Impact drove breath from lungs and sent bright pain shooting through ribs, but they were alive and temporarily beyond immediate pursuit. Alive, but not safe. Waukeeza corrected himself, hearing shouts erupting as their theft was discovered. Not even close to safe. Behind them, office erupted in activity as theft was discovered. Lanterns appeared at windows, while armed men began organizing search parties throughout complex voices, carrying urgency of people who knew their employer's reaction to failure would be swift and brutal. "This way." Waukeeza gasped, leading them toward wooden chute connecting stamp room to tailings pond far below. The slide was designed for waste rock, but it would transport 3 desperate fugitives if they could survive the ride. Like sledding, he thought with dark humor, except the hill wants to kill us, and there's no soft landing. They tumbled down chute in tangle of limbs and desperate prayers, picking up splinters and bruises while gaining speed that threatened to send them flying off mountainside entirely. Strongbox bounced between them like metal cannonball, adding injury to indignity of their escape. At bottom, they landed beside mercury-contaminated tailings, pond its poisoned water, glowing with eerie phosphorescence, speaking of chemical processes never intended by nature. Smell alone was enough to make them gag, despite improvised masks. Beautiful and deadly, Waukeeza thought. Like everything Ransom touches. Rifle fire began cracking from mill buildings above muzzle flashes, winking like deadly fireflies against backdrop of spreading alarm. But shots were hasty and poorly aimed shooters firing at shadows rather than clear targets. We need horses. Waukeeza said, checking Strongbox to ensure it had survived their violent descent intact. Lock mechanism appeared undamaged, though case itself bore new dents and scratches. They made their way through industrial maze using steam shovels and ore carts for cover, while search parties fanned out with torches, turning night into chaotic landscape of dancing shadows and shouted orders. Equipment shed near main gate contained 4 horses in box stalls, along with saddles and gear for extended trips into high country. As they prepared animals with desperate haste, Waukeeza worked on Strongbox's combination lock using techniques learned from reformed safecracker during Army scouting days. 3 numbers, probably significant dates, or amounts he thought, listening for subtle clicks indicating proper alignment. What would a man like Ransom choose? Lock clicked open just as they heard approaching voices. Inside box, nested in velvet-lined compartments like crown jewels, were items that made their dangerous infiltration worthwhile beyond wildest hopes. First was leather-bound ledger containing detailed records of bribes paid to territorial officials, complete with dates, amounts, and specific legislative favors purchased. But more damning were physical objects accompanying documents. The Great Scott! Nora breathed, lifting out ornate silver seal-catching lamplight. That's Territorial Land Office's official stamp. With this, Ransom could forge any document he wanted, deeds, grants, water rights, anything. The seal of corruption, Waukeeza thought grimly. How many homesteads has this stolen? Beside seal lay multiple sets of forged signature plates for various officials, along with samples of territorial government letterhead and official seals from mining water rights and law enforcement agencies. It was complete counterfeiting operation that could reproduce any official document with perfect authenticity. But most shocking discovery was leather envelope marked P. Whitcomb Personal Insurance in Ransom's spidery handwriting. Inside was letter in Peter Whitcomb's own hand, dated just days before his death. To my daughters. It read in their father's familiar script. If you are reading this, then my worst fears have proven justified. Victor Ransom discovered my investigation of his mercury dumping and has forced me to participate in his corruption by threatening your lives directly. He made me sign documents transferring portion of our water rights to his shell companies, using your safety as leverage against my conscience. I have hidden evidence of his crimes and my coerced cooperation in places he will never find. Seek justice for our family, but know that your father died loving you and regretting his weakness in face of pure evil. Coerced cooperation. Hazel read over her sister's shoulder, tears streaming as understanding replaced years of confused grief. Papa didn't betray us willingly. He was protecting us the only way he could, and died for it anyway, Waukeeza thought with cold fury. Just like he'll kill us if we give him chance. But there was no time for grief. Voices were approaching equipment shed with purposeful sound of men who knew exactly where they were going. They mounted stolen horses and rode out of Owl Canyon as sun painted eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Quicksilver Mill erupted in frenzied activity as Ransom's men organized pursuit with every available resource. Every man in that mill will be hunting us by sunrise. Waukeeza thought grimly, and most are better armed than we are. But ahead lay Prairie Rose, where final confrontation would determine whether justice or corruption ruled this corner of frontier. Strongbox's contents had given them more than evidence. They now possessed actual tools ransom used to corrupt territorial government. If we live long enough to deliver it, Waukeeza reminded himself, hearing pursuit growing louder behind them. That's still a very big if. But for first time since this nightmare began, he felt something approaching hope. They had evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, proof that would convince even corrupt officials to distance themselves from Victor Ransom rather than risk being dragged down with him. They found Chogan 3 miles from Prairie Rose, and the sight stopped Waukeeza's heart for several terrible seconds before grief and rage replaced shock. The old warrior sat propped against lightning-struck cottonwood beside Creek Winchester, across knees and elk-hide shirt soaked with dried blood. His weathered face was peaceful in death eyes, closed, as if he'd simply decided to rest before continuing journey to wherever spirits go when earthly work is finished. Uncle Waukeeza thought, dismounting with legs that suddenly felt unsteady. "You weren't supposed to die for my choices." 2 young Cheyenne braves lay nearby, bodies covered with trade blankets that couldn't hide stillness beneath or spreading stains marking where bullets had found their marks. Scene spoke of brief but violent engagement, desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. Waukeeza knelt beside his uncle's body, feeling weight of loss settle like heavy blanket. Chogan had been more than family mentor, teacher, living link to tribal traditions, disappearing as surely as buffalo herds. Old man's lips were flecked with dried blood, evidence he'd been shot through lungs, but his hands still gripped rifle with determination of someone who'd fought to very end. Scattered brass cartridge cases around his position showed he'd made attackers pay dearly. He died as he lived. Waukeeza thought, struggling to contain grief, threatening to become paralyzing rage. Fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "Nephew," came whisper so faint, Waukeeza almost missed it. Chogan's eyes opened slightly, focusing with immense effort on younger man's face. "You came back to me." "Don't try to talk, Uncle. Nip must tell you." Chogan gasped each word, costing visible effort. They came at dawn. 6 riders led by Lightning Bill and Stone Heart sold their souls for white man's silver. "We fought them here to buy you time to escape with the women." Lightning Bill and Stone Heart. Names hit Waukeeza like physical blows. Lightning Bill was mixed blood cast out for stealing from his own people. Stoneheart was worse-full Cheyenne, who'd taken government money to track former brothers like hunting dog turned on its pack. How many escaped? None of them. Chogan whispered something like pride flickering in fading eyes. "We made sure of that. But more will come before sun sets high." They circle town like wolves around wounded buffalo. Old man's grip tightened on Waukeeza's wrist. "Listen well, nephew. White man's silver has poisoned more than water. It has poisoned hearts and turned brother against brother. But you must keep the river clean for those who cannot fight. That's all that matters now, children who will drink from streams we defend today." The children, Waukeeza thought, remembering his young cousin's fevered face. It always comes back to the children. "I will, Uncle, I promise." Chogan smiled, blood-staining teeth, but eyes holding peace of someone who'd kept faith with ancestors and principles. "Good. Spirits of our fathers ride with you, and land itself fights beside those who protect it from poison and corruption. Remember that when darkness comes." With those words, he released hold on life with dignity of someone who'd lived according to principles and died defending them. Waukeeza arranged body in position of honor, Winchester beside him, and eagle feather bonnet settled properly on gray head. "I'll come back for proper burial," he promised silently. "When this is finished, I'm sorry for your loss," Nora said softly as they prepared, continuing toward Prairie Rose. "He died as he lived." Waukeeza replied, voice rough with suppressed emotion. fighting to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. There's honor in such death, even if it comes too soon. And I'll make sure it wasn't for nothing, he added silently. His sacrifice will have meaning if I can get this evidence to honest men. They approached Prairie Rose from north, where Willow Creek curved through box elder grove leaves, showing autumn colors. Town appeared deceptively peaceful in morning sunlight, but Waukeesa could see mounted figures stationed on surrounding hills, too many riders positioned too strategically for coincidence. They've turned the whole town into killing ground, he realized. But why surround it instead of just guarding approaches? It's an ambush, Hazel said, voice tight with understanding. They're waiting for us to ride into their gun sights. Waukeesa studied terrain with warrior's eye, noting sentry positions and calculating fields of fire that would turn Main Street into gauntlet. Prairie Rose had been transformed from frontier community into fortress designed to crush anyone approaching without adequate preparation. But every fortress has weaknesses, he thought. Question is finding them before we're spotted. The storm drains, Nora said suddenly. If we can reach creek upstream from town, we might enter through drainage system again. They left horses ground-tied in willow thicket and entered drainage system on foot, crawling through accumulated debris and standing water. But tunnel provided concealment while leading directly toward town's heart. One more tunnel, Waukeesa thought grimly. One more desperate gamble. They emerged into schoolhouse cellar to find it occupied by wounded men who looked like they'd survived small war. Walter Briggs sat with back against stone wall, bloody bandage around head and double-barrel shotgun across knees. His farmer's face was grim with exhaustion, but eyes still held stubborn determination. Dr. Barnes was cleaning bullet graze on forearm medical bag open, and Winchester propped within reach. Despite wound, his hands remained steady, same hands that delivered babies and set bones now forced to defend community he'd served faithfully. Even the doctor's been drawn into this war, Waukeesa thought bitterly. Ransom's corruption has turned everyone into soldiers. Slumped in corner sat Deputy Will Harper, with badge lying in dirt beside him, face showing multiple bruises and right eye swollen, nearly shut from systematic beating. But it was what Waukeesa saw in Harper's eyes that told real story, not just physical pain, but deeper anguish of man who discovered true cost of his compromises. About time you showed up, Walter growled hoarsely. We've been holding this position since midnight, waiting for you to bring back evidence everybody's dying for. What happened? Where's Beatrice? Please don't let her be dead, Hazel thought. Dr. Barnes looked up from bandaging. Ransom's men tried burning us out around midnight, said we were harboring fugitives and enemies of territorial law. Miss Beatrice, she fought them off with her father's old fowling piece, held them at front door until we could get organized. She's alive, Nora asked quickly. Alive and spitting mad, Walter confirmed with something approaching grin. Took 3 of them down before they decided maybe burning down schoolhouse wasn't worth dying for. 3 men, Waukeesa thought with admiration. A schoolteacher took down 3 professional killers. Will Harper raised battered head, showing rueful smile, mostly hidden by swelling. I tried standing up to them earlier, told them they had no legal authority destroying public property without proper warrants. His smile became more bitter. They disagreed with my legal interpretation in ways that left lasting impressions. Took my badge, said I was relieved of duty for refusing legitimate orders. Superior authority, Waukeesa thought grimly. The authority of silver over conscience. Strange thing is, Harper added, touching swollen face, I feel better without that badge than I did wearing it. Turns out there's something to sleeping with clear conscience, even with black eye. Redemption comes in many forms, Waukeesa reflected, but usually costs more than people expect. Waukeesa set precious strongbox on Beatrice's desk, where lamplight could reveal its significance. Schoolhouse looked like battlefield windows, barricaded with overturned desks, bullet holes pocking walls, gunpowder smell lingering like violent incense. How many are we facing? he asked, checking rifle loads while assessing defensive position. 25, maybe 30. Walter replied, wincing as he shifted position. Ransom's regular crew plus hard cases imported from Denver. Professional killers working for whoever pays best rates. Professional killers, Wakiza thought grimly, against farmers, a doctor-disgraced deputy, and 3 fugitives with more courage than ammunition. Nora opened strongbox with hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, displaying contents on teacher's desk where lamplight revealed their significance. Forged seals and signature plates seemed almost mundane in Schoolhouse's domestic setting, but Dr. Barnes examined them with same careful attention he reserved for medical diagnoses. "These are damning beyond anything we hoped for," he said finally. "Proof not just of what Ransom did, but exactly how he corrupted the entire system." "Smoking guns," Walter observed. "Every document that stole homestead land, every fake water rights transfer, this made it all possible." "Judge Laurent isn't due for 6 more days," Will said, touching swollen face carefully. "We'll never hold out that long against professional killers with unlimited ammunition." 6 days, Wakiza thought grimly. "We'll be lucky to last 6 hours. Then we don't wait for rescue," Wakiza said with quiet determination. "We take this evidence public force confrontation that even corrupt officials can't ignore." But even as he spoke, sound of horses surrounded building like thunder. Voices shouted orders while boots scraped on wood, suggesting men taking positions on nearby rooftops. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped in building that could burn around them like matchbox. But they possessed something enemies lacked: desperate courage of people fighting for principles more important than personal survival. The final battle, Wakiza thought. Win or lose, this is where it ends. "Listen to me," Wakiza called through barricaded window voice, carrying across schoolyard. "We have evidence of Victor Ransom's crimes against this territory, and its people forged government seals, bribe records, proof of systematic corruption reaching Denver." Let them chew on that, he thought grimly. Silence fell outside as his words sank in creating moment of uncertainty. Then Greasy Pete's voice boomed back, carrying authority of man, accustomed to having last word in violent arguments. "All we hear is 3 murderers trying to save their necks with lies and forgeries," he bellowed. But something in his tone suggested he was working harder to convince his own men. "You got 10 minutes to surrender before we finish this permanent—" But Wakiza had noticed something crucial in the silence, uncertainty among some besiegers' men who perhaps hadn't fully understood what they were being paid to suppress. Doubt, he thought with grim satisfaction. "First crack in their united front." "Altered," he said quietly. "How many of those men are locals versus hired guns?" "Maybe half and half. Some are Prairie Rose folks who've been scared or bought, but they ain't natural killers. Local men with families and consciences," Wakiza thought, "versus professional killers with neither. That's division we can exploit." Wakiza moved to window-facing Main Street, where he could see largest concentration of armed men. Among them, he recognized several faces: shopkeepers, farmers, working men caught between economic necessity and moral principle. "Citizens of Prairie Rose," he called out, voice carrying clearly. "Look at what you're being asked to do. Burn down your own schoolhouse to protect a man who's been poisoning your water and stealing your land." He held up ornate territorial seal where sunlight caught silver surface and sent reflections dancing across schoolyard. "This is official stamp of Territorial Land Office. Victor Ransom used it to forge documents stealing homestead claims throughout watershed. How many of your neighbors lost farms to his fraudulent transfers?" Hit them where it hurts, he thought, in their property and families. Murmurs rippled through besieging force as men recognized implications of what they were seeing. Several began lowering weapons, looking uncertain about their participation in what was beginning to seem less like law enforcement and more like conspiracy. "Don't listen to them," Greasy Pete shouted, but his voice now carried desperation that hadn't been there before. "They're lying murderers trying to save their skins." But damage was done. Dr. Barnes appeared at another window, medical bag, prominently displayed to remind everyone of his respected position and oath to serve all people. These men are asking you to kill your own doctor for treating mercury poisoning cases. He called out professional reputation lending weight to words. Cases traced directly to contamination from Ransom's mill, including children who nearly died from poisoned water. Children Wakiza thought watching faces react to that word. The one thing that cuts through politics and greed. Several men began talking among themselves, some turning away from Schoolhouse entirely, while others formed small groups debating their continued participation. Carefully organized assault was beginning to fracture along lines of conscience and community loyalty. That's when Deputy Harper made his move. Despite battered condition, he struggled to window-facing largest group of hesitant locals. I wore badge in this town for 3 years. He called out, voice hoarse but carrying authority of someone who'd taken oath to protect and serve. I took vow to uphold justice and protect innocent people. What we're being asked to do here ain't law enforcement. It's murder to hide murder of Peter Whitcomb, and God knows how many others. The honest lawman speaks. Wakiza thought watching effect of Harper's words on men who'd known him as decent officer. Sometimes redemption is most powerful weapon. Effect was electric. Men who'd known Will Harper as honest lawman began talking among themselves in voices carrying increasing agitation and doubt. Some turned backs on Schoolhouse and walked away entirely, while others formed protective line between professional killers and building they'd been ordered to destroy. The tide is turning, Wakiza realized with growing hope. Local conscience versus imported violence, and conscience is winning. Greasy Pete recognized his control slipping like sand through fingers. "Kill them all," he roared, raising rifle toward Schoolhouse with murder blazing in eyes. $100 bonus to whoever brings me their heads. But before he could fire, one of local farmers stepped directly between Foreman and his target, placing his own body in line of fire. "No," the man said simply, voice carrying quiet authority of someone who'd found moral center and intended defending it. "I ain't killing Doc Barnes, who delivered my youngest boy. And I ain't burning down school where my children learned to read." One man's courage, Wakiza thought with growing admiration, inspiring others to remember who they really are. Other locals began moving, some walking away entirely, while others formed increasingly solid line between professional killers and Schoolhouse. Carefully organized siege was dissolving into chaos as men chose sides based on conscience rather than coin. Community versus corruption, he thought with fierce satisfaction, and community is stronger than silver. That's when sound of approaching cavalry cut through morning air, like saber through silk thunder of hoofbeats, and jingle of equipment, announcing arrival of federal authority in form of uniformed soldiers with sabers drawn and carbines ready. Remaining hired guns, recognizing they were outnumbered and outgunned by legitimate military force, began throwing down weapons and raising hands in universal gesture of surrender. Some tried slipping away in confusion, but mounted troopers were already positioning themselves to cut off escape routes. The cavalry arrives, Wakiza thought with relief so intense it made his knees weak. Just like in dime novels. Greasy Pete looked around wildly, seeing his forces melting away, and careful plans crumbling into dust and betrayal. With roar of frustrated rage that could be heard across entire town, he charged toward Schoolhouse with Colt revolver in each hand, determined to finish what he'd started, even if it meant facing military justice. One last desperate gamble, Wakiza thought, meeting charge with rifle empty and no time to reload. Winner takes all. Wakiza met him at front steps with rifle useless, and only seconds to react, two men colliding with bone-jarring impact that sent both sprawling in dust among scattered cartridge cases. They grappled hand to hand while cavalry troopers thundered into yard around them. He's heavier and meaner, Wakiza realized. But I'm faster and fighting for something more important than money. Pete was stronger and more experienced in close combat with brutal power of someone who'd spent years intimidating weaker people through violence. But Wakiza was faster and more desperate, fighting with focused intensity of someone protecting everything he held dear. For Chogan, he thought grimly, dodging vicious elbow aimed at his throat. For children who deserve clean water. For justice. Struggle ended when Dr. Barnes stepped calmly out of schoolhouse and shot Greasy Pete through leg with surgical precision, dropping him, writhing in dirt like snake with severed spine. Physician's medical training had taught him exactly where to place bullet for maximum incapacitation with minimum permanent damage. I took oath to do no harm, Dr. Barnes said, methodically reloading rifle while watching his patient thrash in pain. But I never promised not to stop harm being done to innocent people. The doctor's justice, Wakiza thought with grim satisfaction. Precise, effective, and completely appropriate. Judge Laurent dismounted from his lathered horse and surveyed scene with calm authority of someone who'd witnessed frontier justice from every angle during decades on territorial bench. He was older than expected, perhaps 60, with silver hair and penetrating gaze that missed nothing significant. Would someone explain why I find this peaceful community in state of armed insurrection? He asked, mildly toned, suggesting genuine curiosity rather than official displeasure. The judge who might actually be honest, Wakiza thought with cautious hope, our last chance for legal justice. Nora stepped forward with strongbox contents displayed on wooden tray dress, torn and muddy, but dignity intact, despite everything they'd endured. Your Honor, we have evidence of systematic criminal conspiracy involving bribery, fraud, attempted murder, and theft of water rights throughout territorial watershed. Judge Laurent examined documents and physical evidence with methodical attention, asking pointed questions about dates, witnesses, and chain of custody required for successful prosecution. When finished, his weathered face was grim with understanding of corruption's scope. He understands, Wakiza realized with growing relief. He sees what we've been fighting against. These are extremely serious charges supported by substantial evidence, he said, voice carrying full weight of judicial authority. Mr. Victor Ransom and his associates will face trial in Denver on multiple criminal charges. He turned to address gathered crowd defenders and surrendered attackers alike, plus townspeople who'd emerged from hiding to witness confrontation's resolution. By authority vested in me by Territory of Colorado and United States government, I hereby order immediate arrest of Victor Ransom and all identified associates. Furthermore, I declare null and void any actions taken by local officials under duress or corruption pending complete investigation. Assembled crowds stirred at this announcement, some cheering, while others looked worried about what investigation might reveal about their own compromises. Justice at last, Wakiza thought, feeling exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. But will it be enough to heal what's been broken? I also validate and confirm land patent executed by Peter Whitcomb, granting full water rights to his daughters and establishing their legal ownership of disputed properties. Whitcomb Ditch will remain under private management according to original trust terms. He paused, looking directly at Wakiza with something approaching respect. Finally, I commend courage of all those who risked their lives exposing this corruption. Democracy depends on citizens willing to stand for what's right, regardless of personal cost. Recognition, Wakiza thought with surprise. From federal judge who understands what this cost us. As cavalry troopers began processing captured gunmen, Wakiza found himself surrounded by people offering thanks and invitations to remain in Prairie Rose permanently. But all he really wanted was quiet place to think about Chogan, who died making this moment possible. The war is over, he thought wearily. But peace will take longer to build. Judge Laurent's hearing stretched 8 days, conducted from makeshift bench in restored schoolhouse, while entire community watched justice unfold with deliberate precision. The stolen evidence proved devastating, systematically destroying Ransom's criminal empire through testimony and documentation. Trials concluded with Victor Ransom sentenced to 25 years in territorial prison assets, seized for victim restitution. Quicksilver Mill was shut down permanently, equipment sold for environmental cleanup funding. 25 years, Wakiza thought with grim satisfaction. He'll die in prison. Most importantly, court established legal precedents for environmental protection and corporate accountability that would influence territorial law for decades. But most significant changes were harder to quantify. Gradual shift in how communities regarded each other represented fundamental transformation of social relationships poisoned by decades of manipulation. Children from Cheyenne camps began attending classes at reopened schoolhouse alongside settler kids. Families started trading directly with Indian horse breeders and craftspeople. Whitcomb Ditch reopened under Nora's trusteeship with water allocations determined by community board, including both communities. Children learning together, Waukeesa thought. That's how you change the future, one classroom at a time. Dr. Barnes received territorial appointment as regional health officer, serving all communities. Deputy Harper was promoted to sheriff with authority to recruit additional deputies, including Cheyenne trackers. Walter Briggs received priority water rights to restore his agricultural operations. On Judge Laurent's final day, Waukeesa stood beside Willow Creek, where his uncle had died, watching clear water run over stones, no longer showing Mercury's silver stain. Mill closure had allowed natural healing to begin. "Uncle, we did it," he thought, kneeling to touch clean water sparkling in sunlight. The river runs clean again. Nora approached as he stood there, desperate brittleness having left her face during weeks of testimony and legal proceedings, replaced by quiet confidence of someone who'd fought for justice and seen it triumph. They've both grown stronger, Waukeesa realized, seeing how sisters carried themselves with new assurance. Judge Laurent leaves tomorrow morning, Nora said, settling beside him on fallen cottonwood log. Things should remain peaceful with Ransom's network broken. Waukeesa nodded, still watching water flow with steady persistence that had carved canyons throughout ancient landscape. "Your father would be proud," he said finally. "You not only saved his legacy, but secured future for everyone depending on this creek." "We saved it," Nora corrected gently. "All of us working together. That cooperation made the difference." Us, Waukeesa thought, noting how naturally she included him. Not white and Indian, just us. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to water's eternal song and meadowlarks calling from surrounding grassland. Finally, Nora spoke words that had been growing between them during weeks of shared danger. "The Cheyenne camps will be moving soon, won't they? Following seasonal migration patterns." "Traditionally, yes," Waukeesa replied thoughtfully. "But water rights your father established mean we can maintain year-round presence here with permanent camps for horse breeding and trading. Old patterns are changing as world around us changes." Change, he thought. The only constant except water's song and mountain's patience. "And you personally?" Nora asked, voice carefully neutral, but eyes holding hope. "Will you travel with seasonal camps or stay closer to settled areas?" Waukeesa turned to look at her directly, seeing not desperate fugitive he'd first encountered, but woman who'd proven courage under fire and commitment to justice, regardless of cost. Home isn't a place, he realized. It's people you'd fight beside and die for. "Judge Laurent offered me permanent position as territorial liaison between communities," he said slowly. "He believes territory needs someone who understands both cultures and can translate more than spoken languages." Nora's smile was small but genuine, transforming serious features in a way that made her appear younger and more hopeful. "That sounds like important work preventing future conflicts. It would mean staying in this region most of the year, helping resolve disputes before they become shooting wars. Building bridges instead of following ancient trails across empty grassland. Building instead of just surviving, he thought. Creating something lasting. The schoolhouse will always need help," Nora said carefully. "Beatrice is getting older, and student population keeps growing. Someone who understands both communities could be invaluable." Waukeesa felt something shift inside him, recognition that had been building since that first night, when three strangers learned to depend on each other and discovered they were stronger together than apart. The warrior becomes peacemaker, he thought with wonder, and finds he likes the work better than fighting, if water runs thin again. Nora said, echoing earlier words, "We'll signal with lantern on schoolhouse porch." "I'll come," Wakiza replied, meaning it as more than promise. It was commitment to future, where cooperation replaced conflict. "I'll always come when you need me." As sun set behind western mountains, painting sky in gold and crimson, reflecting off restored creek like liquid fire, they walked back toward Prairie Rose together. Behind them, water continued eternal flow, carrying clean moisture toward plains where both Cheyenne horses and settler crops would drink deeply without fear of poison. War was over. Peace was beginning, built on mutual respect rather than fear-shared struggle, rather than suspicion. In growing darkness, Prairie Rose's lights shone warm, and welcoming beacon of hope for anyone believing justice was worth fighting for, regardless of skin color or prayer language. One night, with two forbidden settler sisters, had changed Wakiza's life forever. He reflected as they reached town's edge, where schoolhouse stood ready to welcome children from both communities. But transformation had run deeper than romance. It had been metamorphosis of man who'd learned that sometimes greatest courage lay not in riding away from civilization, but in helping build it into something worth preserving. As they reached schoolhouse steps, Wakiza made his final decision. Tomorrow, he would accept Judge Laurent's offer, beginning new chapter as peacemaker, translator, and guardian of fragile understanding three desperate people had forged in crucible of shared danger. The Cheyenne warrior was becoming something new, bridge between worlds, translator of more than words, protector of delicate balance, allowing different peoples to share same land without destroying each other. In that transformation lay hope of territory where children could grow without fearing neighbors, where water ran clean and justice flowed deeper than silver veins in mountain stone. The future, he thought, looking toward tomorrow with anticipation rather than dread. It stretches ahead like unmarked trail full of challenges and opportunities. But for first time in years, it was future worth working toward, worth fighting for, worth risks that came with choosing hope over despair, cooperation over conflict, and love over fear. In distance, church bell tolled, evening hour bronze voice, carrying across grassland like benediction over hard-won peace, replacing chaos of corruption and violence. Sound spoke of community continuity and enduring human capacity to build something better from ruins of what came before. Tomorrow, Wakiza thought, feeling Nora's hand find his in darkness, as they stood together on threshold of whatever came next. Whatever it brings, we'll face it together.